1968, a year of chaos, scandal, and shocking events. The year 1968 was a turning point in modern history. It was marked by protests, assassinations, uprisings, and cultural shifts that reverberated across the globe. This video delves into 10 of the most scandalous and shocking events of this tumultuous year, exploring the people, places, and moments that defined it. Number 1. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. On April 4, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the face of the civil rights movement, was assassinated at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. King had traveled to Memphis to support a strike by sanitation workers, standing in solidarity with their demands for fair wages and safe working conditions. As King stood on the motel's balcony, he was shot by James Earl Ray, a fugitive who had escaped from prison in 1967. Ray was arrested in London 2 months later and sentenced to 99 years in prison, though he insisted he was a scapegoat, fueling numerous conspiracy theories. King's death triggered riots in more than 100 U.S. cities, causing 43 deaths, thousands of injuries, and widespread destruction. Coretta Scott King, his widow, poignantly said, "The assassin may have killed the dreamer, but he cannot kill the dream." The assassination marked a turning point in the civil rights movement, exposing the nation's deep racial tensions and galvanizing further demands for equality. Number 2. The My Lai Massacre in Vietnam. On March 16, 1968, U.S. soldiers from Charlie Company, under Lieutenant William Calley's command, committed an atrocity in the Vietnamese hamlet of My Lai, massacring more than 500 unarmed civilians, including women, children, and elderly villagers. The soldiers claimed to be rooting out Viet Cong fighters, but their actions revealed a horrific abuse of power. The massacre remained hidden until 1969 when whistleblower Ron Ridenour exposed the truth. Graphic photos taken by Army photographer Ronald Heberl shocked the world, igniting outrage. Calley was court-martialed and convicted of war crimes in 1971 but served only 3.5 years under house arrest. The massacre became a defining moment of the Vietnam War, amplifying anti-war protests and symbolizing the devastating consequences of the conflict. Seymour Hersh, the journalist who first broke the story, described it as a crime of unthinkable proportions. Number 3. The assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. On June 5, 1968, Robert F. Kennedy, a leading figure of hope during a tumultuous era, was fatally shot moments after delivering a victory speech for the California Democratic primary at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. The assassin, Sirhan Sirhan, a 24-year-old Palestinian, targeted RFK, reportedly outraged by his strong support for Israel. Kennedy's campaign, centered on ending the Vietnam War and addressing poverty and inequality, had inspired millions. After the shooting, Kennedy lingered in critical condition for 26 hours before succumbing to his injuries on June 6. His death left the nation reeling, already mourning the loss of Martin Luther King Jr. just 2 months earlier. At his funeral, his brother Ted Kennedy quoted Shakespeare, "He was a man, take him for all in all, I shall not look upon his like again." RFK's assassination extinguished a symbol of moral leadership, leaving a void in a deeply divided America. Number 4. The Prague Spring Suppression. In January 1968, Alexander Dubček was elected as the first secretary of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia, introducing liberal reforms under the banner of socialism with a human face. The Prague Spring reforms included easing censorship, decentralizing the economy, and expanding freedoms of speech and assembly. However, Dubček's policies alarmed the Soviet Union. On the night of August 20 to 21, 1968, the Soviet Union, backed by Warsaw Pact forces, launched a massive invasion of Czechoslovakia to suppress the reforms. Over 250,000 troops and 2,000 tanks occupied the country, killing 137 civilians and wounding hundreds. Dubček was arrested and forced to publicly renounce his reforms. The phrase Prague Spring came to symbolize the fleeting nature of hope for political freedom under Soviet rule. In his later years, Dubček reflected, "We tried to create a better world, but we underestimated the power of the machine." Number 5. The Democratic National Convention riots. The Democratic National Convention, held in Chicago in August 1968, was a flashpoint of America's political and social unrest. Anti-war demonstrators, angry over the Vietnam War and the Democratic Party's perceived failure to end it, staged massive protests outside the convention hall. Chicago Mayor Richard Daley deployed 12,000 police officers and 15,000 National Guardsmen to control the crowds. Television cameras captured scenes of violent clashes, police wielding batons, tear gas enveloping protesters, and chants of "the whole world is watching." The riots deeply damaged the Democratic Party's reputation, and many blamed Daley's heavy-handed tactics for the brutality. The convention's chaos reflected the broader divisions tearing America apart in 1968, from the Vietnam War to the fight for civil rights. Number 6. The Tet Offensive shocks America. On January 30, 1968, during the Vietnamese New Year, Tet, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched a coordinated offensive, attacking more than 100 cities and outposts across South Vietnam, including the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. The surprise assault, while eventually repelled, marked a significant psychological turning point in the Vietnam War. U.S. military leaders had assured the public that victory was near, but the Tet Offensive shattered that illusion. CBS News anchor Walter Cronkite's grim assessment, "It seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate," resonated nationwide. President Lyndon B. Johnson later lamented, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America." Public support for the war plummeted, and Johnson announced he would not seek re-election. Number 7. The assassination attempt on Andy Warhol. On June 3, 1968, Andy Warhol, the famed pop artist, was shot in his Manhattan studio, The Factory, by Valerie Solanas, a radical feminist and author of the Scum Manifesto, Society for Cutting Up Men. Solanas, who had briefly worked with Warhol, accused him of controlling her life and career. She fired 3 shots, hitting Warhol and art critic Mario Amaya. Warhol's injuries were life-threatening, and he underwent 5 hours of surgery to repair his shattered spleen, stomach, liver, and lungs. Warhol survived but suffered chronic pain and physical limitations for the rest of his life. The incident cast a spotlight on Solanas' extreme ideology and mental illness, as well as the darker side of Warhol's fame. Warhol later reflected, "I knew I'd live the rest of my life scarred from the event, physically and emotionally." Number 8. The Mexico City Massacre. On October 2, 1968, Mexican government forces violently suppressed a student protest at Tlatelolco Plaza in Mexico City, killing hundreds of demonstrators. The protest, organized by the National Strike Council, sought democratic reforms and an end to government corruption. The massacre occurred just 10 days before the Olympic Games, as President Gustavo Díaz Ordaz sought to project Mexico as a modern nation. Official reports claimed only 30 deaths, but eyewitness accounts and later investigations estimated fatalities in the hundreds. Journalist Elena Poniatowska chronicled survivors' harrowing accounts, describing the plaza as a scene of blood and chaos. Despite the carnage, the Olympics went on, leaving a legacy of repression overshadowing Mexico's global aspirations. Number 9. The Columbia University protests. In April 1968, Columbia University students staged protests against the university's plan to construct a gymnasium in a Harlem park and its involvement in military research. The protests escalated into an occupation of 5 campus buildings, led by the Students for a Democratic Society, SDS. The standoff lasted a week before police stormed the campus, injuring over 100 students. The gym plan was eventually canceled, and the protests became a landmark in the era of student activism. Mark Rudd, one of the protest leaders, later recalled, "We weren't just fighting Columbia, we were fighting a system of injustice." The events marked a turning point in student movements, inspiring similar protests across the U.S. Number 10. Barbarella, Scandalizing the Screen. Released in October 1968, Barbarella, directed by Roger Vadim and starring Jane Fonda, became a cultural phenomenon for its provocative mix of science fiction and sensuality. Fonda portrayed a futuristic heroine navigating bizarre, erotic scenarios while clad in revealing costumes. The film polarized audiences, some hailed it as a feminist declaration of sexual liberation, while others dismissed it as exploitative kitsch. Critics noted its audacious visual style, with the New York Times calling it a psychedelic carnival. Jane Fonda later said, "Barbarella wasn't just a film, it was a mirror of the 60s, reflecting the liberation and contradictions of the time." Despite its polarizing reception, Barbarella cemented Fonda's place as both a sex symbol and a countercultural icon.